we're going to look at commas, which are the paper clips of the sentence world. So the reason I say this is because commas do some of the same jobs paper clips do. So paper clips put papers together and commas tie thoughts together. Sometimes we use paper clips to separate different stacks so that we know what we need to use or not use. And so commas help us separate words or groups of words. They make us pause and think. They set off conversational thoughts. And so they do a lot of really neat jobs, and we need to know what those jobs are. One thing we're not going to do is use our feelings, right? You may have thought, or maybe your teacher said, that when you feel a pause, that's where you should put a comma. Well, that's not going to work. We can't go by our feelings because we'll feel differently tomorrow than we do today. And our classmate will feel one way and we'll feel another way. So it's really not a good way to decide where we're going to put commas. We're not going to go by our feelings. One of the things I like about learning all of this is when you begin to use it correctly, you own it. So you use it correctly a few times. It's like riding a bike. You won't even think about it anymore. You'll just put them where they should go. So let's look at the very first way that we need to use commas, and that's after an intro phrase or clause. An intro can be a word or a group of words before the start of an official sentence. So commas are going to follow intros. We will always do that for everything. That's going to help us in a lot of different ways, and I'll explain that in just a minute. So some intros add useful information. Before John ate the cookie, he counted the chocolate chips. Now, in reality, and in some of your writing, you can take that same information in the intro and move it to the back of the sentence. I could say, John counted the chocolate chips before he ate the cookie. That still gives me the information. I don't need a comma either when I do that, just when I put it before. Now, some intros are conversational. We don't really need them. You're not going to use that when you create your writing, but your speakers and the people you interview will. So you really need to know where to put those. In fact, John revealed he truly was a chipaholic. And so I'm going to put that comma after in fact. Now, some intros add a transition for time, place, or change of thought. Afterward, John hid the rest of the cookies so he could scarf them down while watching Netflix. So words like afterward, before, later, even time order words, those help us to transition between thoughts to show the passage of time. And those are helpful in our writing. We'll talk about that a little bit more later in the semester. Now, some writers omit commas after short intros. By evening, John had eaten at least a dozen of Grandma's home-baked cookies. However, we're going to use commas for all of our intros, and I want to do that. First of all, it's going to help us to correctly punctuate them, but also we tend to overuse intro phrases and clauses, and we need to see how often we do it so we can stop it. It slows your audience down. It's good for variety. But in media writing, we have a job to do, and that's to make sure that our audience gets the information quickly and clearly. Now, I just told you we're not going to go by feelings, but if you read out loud, you can actually feel where these commas go. You can feel the end of an intro, phrase, or clause. But remember, we don't always get the feels, and we don't have the same feels. So we can't use it. We have to know. Now, I would say this is going to be one of the most important ways to use commas, and that's when we combine them with a fanboys in a compound sentence. So fanboys is an easy way to remember this special group of joining words. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. We're going to use a comma before a fanboys in a compound sentence. Ferdinand was a bull, comma, but he was also a faithful friend. So there's a complete sentence on one side of the fanboys and a complete sentence on the other side of the fanboys. So a compound sentence are two complete sentences that are joined by a fanboys. John caught the ball. He threw it to me. He was the game hero. We gave him a trophy. So notice each one of those has a fanboys, and that fanboys has a comma before it. One thing you want to be careful of is you want to check and see, is this a compound sentence? Just because you see a fanboys mixed in with other words doesn't mean you're dealing with a compound sentence. So let's look here. Ferdinand is stung by a bee and only wants to smell flowers. So Ferdinand is stung by a bee, that's a complete sentence. Only wants to smell flowers is not a complete sentence. So we just leave it alone. We don't have fanboys in that sentence at all. If you don't have two complete sentences, don't use a comma with a fanboys. Young Ferdinand didn't enjoy fighting with other bulls but preferred to sit under a cork tree. So all this is showing us is some things Ferdinand wanted to do and didn't want to do. So we're going to leave that alone. Now, there are plenty of words that join compound sentences that aren't fanboys. And there are a few that need some special punctuation. So let's look at those. However, moreover, and therefore. The word we're going to look at right now is the word however, because that one is used most often. Know the others because maybe your speaker or someone you interview uses that word and you want to punctuate it correctly when you do. So however uses a semicolon, has a semicolon before and a comma afterward. Young Ferdinand wasn't a fighter, semicolon. However, comma, he grew up to be the strongest of bulls. So that's going to be how you're going to punctuate that sentence. I'm going to give you another choice. So you have your first choice where we have a semicolon and a comma, or you can start your sentence with however. Put a period after your first sentence and then start your sentence with however. Your English teachers are going to like the first choice better. I am fine with either one, but I'm not fine, and no one else is fine with the third way, which is to surround however in commas and just kind of plop it in the middle of a sentence. So that's not a choice. We won't be able to use that one. Now, do you need a comma before the word because? You actually don't. And that's because is not a fanboys, right? So leave it alone. Ferdinand ran wildly across a field because a bee stung him on the nose. Don't do it. From now on, I'm going to take points off if I see that in any of your writing. No comma before the word because. Now the X, Y, and Z rule is quite easy rule. It's also an AP style rule. And that is we're going to omit the comma before the fanboys in a simple series. So I'll show you what a simple series is. It's a list of words. It can be 3 words. It can be 45 words. It can be short, simple phrases also. So Marva had 1 fish, 2 fish, a red fish, and a blue fish. So if you notice, each piece in that series has more than one word in it, but it's not any kind of complicated punctuation. So it's easy to read, and there's no comma before the and. Now, this is a media writing rule. In the land of media writing, we're going to do this. When you practice in the land of English writing, if you have an English class right now, then you probably need the comma before the and. You need to check with your teacher. But for us, we're not going to use it. Now, a simple series is easy to read and the elements don't contain any kind of complicated punctuation. The book is about the activities of such unusual animals as the Nook, Womp, Yink, Yop, Gak, and Zeds. So notice I don't have any comma before the and I could add 100 more words to this. It would still be a simple series. Now, you want to use your judgment. Sometimes the element is simple. The elements are simple, but they're long. And so you want to help your audience, and putting a comma before the fanboys helps the audience to separate those elements. A comma helps us to take a mental breath. So the book has a simple rhythm for children, a freewheeling plot about a boy and a girl named J and K, and the amazing creatures they have for pets and friends. So I'm going to put a comma there because I think it's going to help my audience. Now, interrupters you can feel these actually too. But again, we don't want to go by the feels, right? We want to know that we have an interrupter. They break the flow of a sentence. Often the information is not essential to the sentence. It could be conversational. It could just add a little bit of detail. And so it's separated by commas. Green eggs and ham, though a good source of protein, are not in the menu. He had a wocket, which was in his pocket, and a jerton in the curtain. So I do want to tell you that when you see that word which, that introduces a phrase that's not essential to the sentence, and so it's going to always follow a comma. And if it's in the middle of a sentence, then that phrase that it introduces is going to have commas on both sides. So keep that in mind. That's pretty easy. Now, adjectives, I'm going to show you something that helps me. How do you know when you're going to separate them with a comma? I'm going to show you a trick I use all the time. I call it the switch test. The big brown hairy dog chased Eli. Now, if you can switch those descriptors around and they make sense, that's the switch test. So let's do that with this. The hairy big brown dog chased Eli. That makes sense too, right? So if I can do that, if I can switch them and they make sense, then I'm going to separate those with commas. Now notice that I don't have a comma behind the final adjective in the list. I don't do that. So I don't think you would do it. I think you know that intuitively, but I just wanted to point that out. Let's try this one. Sally brought her bright, fuzzy, gorgeous notebook to our meeting. So what if I say Sally brought her fuzzy, gorgeous, bright notebook to our meeting? I can do that, right? So that means that I can switch those around. And the reason this helps is I want to show you this here. The white picket fence separated my childhood home from my friends. Can I swap white picket? I can't say the picket white fence, right? That doesn't make sense. So I'm not going to do anything with those. The red fire engine raced past us. I can't swap out fire and red, so I'm going to leave those alone. Often, honestly, the reason I want to show you this happens more than you will have list of adjectives. In fact, you don't use as many adjectives in media writing. You want your verbs and your nouns to carry the weight of the sentence. But sometimes you do, so you need to know how to punctuate those. Now, you own the comma. Congratulations. Let's see how we do on our writing and practice using commas in the correct way.